Izuku Midoriya was born just like any other boy. He was brought into this world, into a world though that had insane amounts of power. Power and superpowers that were other known as quirks. Quirks was an extension of themselves. It would make others and well, yourself slightly different and have different restrictions based on the power that you were given. Some would be given super strength, but there would be backlash to the super strength, forcing your bones to crunch almost every single time you use it. Some would have fire quirks that would actually burn and serrate certain pieces of your skin. And these quirks go on for, well, hundreds, maybe even thousands of different types, some that are useful in the feat of combat, and some that are useful, well, never. Of course, though, in the normal story, Mr. Izuku Midoriya didn't have a quirk, but this time around, he does. He would be bullied and obviously taken as if he was just useless by his friend Bakugo, if you can really call him a friend. At a young age, of about 4 to 5, he would eventually go to the doctors with his mother. The doctor would speak to him and his mother and talk to him about what the test results came back as. That these test results came back pretty interesting. There's different parts of Izuku that are actually making some sort of connection with certain objects. It's odd. It's as if his genetic makeup is actually blending without even notice, blending with different objects. The chair he sat on today is somehow building a connection with Izuku himself, as if Izuku would be able to control it. It's kind of odd. And the doctor goes on. If you look deep into the skin of Izuku's hands, it's actually different as well. It seems as if there's strings, these invisible like fabric that is sort of connecting with different objects in the room without him knowing. This is something to take into account, because after they speak on this, Izuku feels lightheaded and tired because he doesn't know how to control his quirk. While he's young, he's actually connecting to just everything around him. It's draining his stamina insane amounts and basically making him extremely exhausted. So the doctor tells his mother, Inko Midoriya, that they should keep him in a safe place. At least clear out a room that doesn't have much in it, and then there you go. You should be okay for a little bit, and he should be able to learn how to utilize this quirk and retract these so-called strings that are within his hands. He is kind of like, maybe a puppeteer in a way. Obviously the doctor laughs a little bit talking about it, because he doesn't know exactly what his quirk is. He just knows the little hints and different things he sees within his body, and on top of that, what's going on around him. Izuku and his mother, Inko Midoriya, would go home, and when they would arrive, she would take action to make sure that her little boy is safe, clearing out a room and making sure everything is okay. She explains to him how his quirk works, or at least to the extent that she knows, and he would begin focusing on retracting these so-called strings. He would wonder what they are. For Inko, she could barely see anything, if not, she couldn't see anything. Izuku could see it as clear as day, as if it was all connecting in one or to every single last bit. But it's kind of odd. Very odd, in fact. She's not really understanding 100% how it works, but at the same time, well, she doesn't need to. Hopefully her little boy could eventually learn how to control being this puppeteer and utilizing this maybe to be a hero. Izuku grew up always loving All Might. So when he would watch All Might, he would think that maybe, just maybe, he can do what All Might does. But he'll be not exactly that type of hero. I mean, he'll definitely be able to do some things, but it won't be to the degree All Might does. Flattening buildings may not be in the cards for him, but he could do far more things if used properly. At least if his quirk is used properly. Izuku is passionate And when I mean passionate, I mean passionate about taking that next step as well, to train, to try and become a hero. He's been told that his quirk is going to be hard to utilize, so he definitely wants to put the effort in. But when he goes to school, on the other hand, he begins to explain to, well, his classmates exactly what his quirk is. And of course, they're kind of, well, they're not big believers. They think that there's no way he can actually do that. And Izuku tries to show them by moving an object in the classroom, but that doesn't really go very well. His hands begin to hurt, and he can't really make a full connection with the object, and unfortunately it falls short. Everyone begins to laugh at him, calling him a freak, that he doesn't have anything. He's just trying to make up excuses, and he just has nothing in his hands at all. He's trying to act like he has some magical fingers or something. No, he doesn't have anything. He's just useless, a useless Deku. And of course, he would continue to get bullied over the course of the years, but Izuku wouldn't allow this to stop him. He would continue working with his quirk, and well, for the next 5 to 10 years, all the way up until he's basically ready to graduate middle school, he's learning how to use his quirk. And eventually, he would do just that. But during this time, he would find a love for actually making kind of dolls, but not quite. It's actually just replica figures of his favorite heroes. I mean, he would make one of All Might, he would make one of heroes like Endeavor and even Hawks. For a while, he was really just able to kind of move them around. That was kind of about it. He wasn't able to do anything crazy. He wasn't able to make them move a bunch of their limbs and fight exactly how he would want to fight and stuff like that. He's just able to move them around and kind of throw them at people, at least for the meantime. And for a lot of years, that's kind of how it is. He'd eventually learn the little nitpicks, but it's so difficult. It's as if he really needs to use it as an extension of one's own body. But with that said, he would continue going to school, and eventually it would be time for the teacher to tell them that, well, they gotta choose what they want to do. But of course, he would end up throwing the papers in the sky, saying that he knows they all want to go the hero route, telling them all that 2 people are actually trying to go to UA. That would be Izuku Midoriya and Katsuki Bakugo. But everybody would look down on Izuku. Nah, he doesn't really have a quirk. I mean, they've seen him move stuff around, but come on, that's not going to get him to UA. Izuku is completely committed, though. He's been working on his quirk, but he's going to take this next bit of time and just work as hard as he possibly can. Whatever he can do, he's going to do it. Of course, Izuku doesn't know exactly the best course of action to, expand his quirk, but still, he's going to try his best over this course of time. Katsuki would of course threaten Izuku, telling him that he shouldn't even try for UA, and so on and so forth, being the jerk he normally is. But of course Izuku doesn't back down, and he's going to try no matter what. When he heads home though, he begins to write in his journal different ways maybe he can use his Puppeteer quirk, and continues to write further. But what he doesn't realize is that going the long way to his home this time around is going to be the most dangerous thing he possibly could do. When he heads over under a bridge, he would eventually hear the rumblings in the sewer. Underneath this sewer, a giant sludge villain would come hurling out of it. The sludge villain would tell Izuku that he needs his body, and he would attack Izuku, immediately grabbing him and trying to basically form around him. Izuku would struggle and continue to struggle as he tries to get free. But during this time, he has a revelation. What is this sludge villain doing? Is he suffocating him or trying to control him? Izuku would think about this and would begin to have the strings in his fingertips reach out throughout the gross sludge all around him. And it would continue to circle more and more and more. But before he could even do anything, another figure would come out of the manhole cover. Immediately, a loud roar could be heard. In a way, a man is there, but it's no ordinary man. It's someone that says, "Detroit Smash!" And as that happens, it's the one and only All Might. All Might blasts the sludge villain off of Izuku, and Izuku goes flying as well. Knocked out temporarily, he would eventually wake up. All Might would be right there standing in front of him, and he would thank All Might and ask for an autograph. And he would obviously help All Might clean up the mess that was made right here, but he would ask All Might. He would go to ask him multiple questions, but unfortunately he isn't able to get the chance. All Might jumps off, but Izuku grabs onto him, wanting to ask if he could really become a hero. And when they land on a roof, eventually he's able to ask that question. Can he be a hero with a quirk he barely knows how to use? All Might doesn't know how to answer. He says that all quirks have their usabilities, but if he doesn't know how to use it, well, or at least properly, I mean, there might not be that good of a chance for him. It might be a struggle down that line. He tells him, though, that everyone finds their uses, so if he feels that he can go down the hero route and he can somehow make it, well, nothing is stopping him. If he gets the right training and the right progression with a quirk that even is weak, a weak quirk can even become strong. All Might says this, and as he does, he shrinks down in size. Izuku freaks out, but the explanation is made and told to Izuku exactly what occurred and why this happens. Izuku would understand, but eventually he would leave. Everyone would leave, but there's a problem. The sludge villain is out of its bottle and escaped, and soon Izuku would see the aftermath of his decision. That aftermath, well, would be the sludge villain grabbing on to Katsuki Bakugo and trying to take his body. Izuku would stand there in complete and utter shock. What is he gonna do? He has to do something. He thinks. No, he can't think. He grabs his backpack and goes sprinting in, throwing the backpack straight at the eye of the sludge villain, trying to give Katsuki a breath. He begins to reach out his hands toward Katsuki. As he grabs onto Bakugo's hand, he seemingly can't get him out. The sludge villain struggles and tries to grab onto Izuku as well, and Izuku thinks he has to do exactly what the sludge villain is doing. He has to focus. He needs to connect, fully connect. He begins to reach out his hands as so much string begins to connect with the sludge villain, more than he possibly ever could in the beginning. It seems like the fight or flight reaction is coming out right now and allowing his quirk to accelerate at an insane height. He immediately would connect with the sludge villain and Bakugo would fall out. Bakugo would stand up, coughing, but he would be okay. Izuku seems linked and he's struggling. His hands are shaking and his body is quaking. It seems like he's struggling to hold on to the sludge villain. He tells Bakugo to move now. Izuku reaches back and throws his hands forward, and this allows the sludge villain to basically be pushed back at least maybe 3 to 5 meters. Izuku makes a break for it as well, and just as he does, he looks up. In the sunshine and in the gleam of light, there he was. Or more like, according to him, I am here. And that is All Might. He Detroit smashes the sludge villain once again, even though he was past his time limit, destroying the sludge villain and saving everyone there. Of course, Izuku gets lectured and blah 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 and so on and so forth, but eventually he's allowed to leave. Izuku feels pretty good, actually pretty good about himself and pretty good about everything. He was able to help Bakugo. He was able to see All Might once again destroy the sludge villain, and he's at peace with that. And now this has given him the drive to work even harder, and he understands now what he needs to do. A connection with these objects. Yes, he's technically did it with a living organism, at least to a certain extent, but a connection with an object that cannot fight back because of obvious reasons. The living soul can fight back, but if he has an object and he completely manipulates it entirely, he should be able to maybe even make, well, a two-man duo. He might be able to fight alongside it in perfect sync as long as he uses his mind properly. Now, this is something to think about. This is something he'll need to work on. He'll work on for as long as he needs to. Izuku is about to be home, but just as he is, someone cuts him off. It's All Might. All Might is there, and he wants to speak with young Midoriya. He speaks with him, telling him that he can do something far greater than just be a hero. He can tell. Especially after today, Izuku has impressed him so much. He really has. He's currently looking, well, for a successor for his own Quirk. And as he begins to explain further, Izuku shakes his head, saying that he barely even knows how to use his own Quirk. It wouldn't be a good idea for him to take on another responsibility, something that would allow him to be of greater importance and greater power. He knows that it sounds odd, but he needs to turn it down. He does. That he hopes that All Might finds a greater successor, the best successor he possibly can. And All Might says that that is the goal, that he's going to be heading to UA and to teach over there. So maybe it is good for him to weigh his options. He wants to see who's on the list, who comes into the entrance exam. Maybe he can find somebody of importance for the One for All Quirk. Izuku agrees, telling him that he's sure that he will find somebody, and maybe there's already somebody that is, well, worthy of the Quirk, in fact. Izuku is about to leave, and All Might is about to say his farewells, but All Might says that nonetheless, he wants to help young Midoriya train. His body is flimsy and is not strong, but if he strengthens his body, his Quirk might accelerate with it, and he's seen the potential that he's shown. He's held off a villain of that caliber. He definitely can have massive potential. Izuku is happy to hear this, and he takes on the challenge and the training that All Might would give him, and he goes on to train for the next 10 months with All Might, trying to use his Quirk, and he begins, or throughout this 10 months as well, he begins to build a sort of, well, mannequin of some sorts. One that could replicate to the style of a human being, but one that is, in a way, disposable. One that can have weaponry if needed, and so on and so forth. And he begins with the last 2 months of that 10-month training period, he begins to train with that so-called doll. The connection is made with the object far easier than he would with a human being or with a living organism, and Izuku realizes that he was going about this all wrong. The connection needs to be there, and now it is. Izuku begins to move, and as he moves, the puppet moves, and as the puppet moves, he moves. It's as if they're in beautiful and instant sync, but they're not doing the same moves at the same time. Izuku is imagining all this in his brain, thinking about it in his head. He throws the right hand, his puppet goes low for a kick to the stomach. He knows now that there's more to it than just connecting. He can really make them two different beings. As long as Izuku stays focused and doesn't lose that focus, him and his puppets, or whatever is connected to him, will be able to move separately in a way, but in coordination to the fact that he can really expose anybody in terms of fighting. Izuku, during this time of training with All Might, he would begin to look up online different fighting techniques. Of course, he's no master of martial arts, but just learning basic things with having a two-man tandem is definitely beneficial. Izuku would continue to learn these things, and the two-man tandem would feel more fluid, a lot more fluidity to definitely the Quirk that he's been using. After the 10 months, All Might is impressed. He tells Izuku that he really has seen insane growth, and even though he doesn't want to take on the responsibility of One for All, he's sure that he's going to find somebody, or of course he might already have found somebody for that Quirk instead. Maybe someone that could really take it on and that already has a good grasp on their Quirk as well. Of course, Izuku is happy to hear this. He wants someone else to be blessed with the Quirk, someone else that maybe is already prepared to take it on. Izuku is now ready for the UA entrance exam. All Might believes so, he believes so, and it's time to go. The UA entrance exam is relatively simple. When he arrives, he begins to walk over and walk to a giant staircase. He sees a couple people that he has no idea who they are, and many who basically kind of look familiar from walking down the streets. People all around Japan are coming to the UA entrance exam in hopes to be the next top hero. UA can get you there, so that's why they are there. He walks in to see that the person he'll be sitting next to is Katsuki Bakugo. Bakugo doesn't say a word to him, but eventually would scoff, telling him that he should never have shown up, that just because he was able to save him doesn't mean his quirk is actually usable. Izuku smiles and says that he's been training, working hard. And of course Bakugo says that he's been training too, but of course he's more gifted than Izuku, so he's definitely going to be further past him in this regard. Of course, Izuku doesn't care what Bakugo says. He doesn't mind, and he knows he had the best trainer he possibly could have in All Might, the #1 hero. Come on, there's nothing better than that. Of course, Izuku just listens in on Present Mike as he explains everything to come. He would eventually take his written portion of the UA entrance exam, and he feels like he did it pretty well. He could have cheated. There's various ways, especially with his quirk, that he could cheat, but of course he doesn't want to. He feels he wants to get in on his own merits, and that is something Izuku definitely feels and would feel in canon all the time anyways. Now back in the auditorium, he begins to listen to Present Mike as he explains the 1-point robot, 2-point robot, 3-point robot, and so on and so forth, including the 0-point robot, after Tenya Ida spews some nonsense about people being too loud and him forgetting about the 0-point robot when he really didn't. Nonetheless, doesn't really matter at the end of the day. Now, they all head to the gate and wait. And wait. Now this is nerve-wracking for Izuku. He has his puppet next to him, but of course, there were some complications even getting this in. Many argued that this was an outside weapon, so he shouldn't even be allowed to use it. But fortunately for him, he's actually able to use it, and he had already went through all the UA regulations and stuff like that. Eventually, the gates would swing open, and everybody would charge forward to destroy as many robots as possible. But the first robot that Izuku fights, he punches through it with his mannequin / doll that he's using to control, and it shatters to pieces. That's not something Izuku thought of very much, especially when building this thing. He didn't think about it. He punched that robot really hard and it might have left a dent, but this, doll is still made out of weaker material than that metal. So now they have a problem. Izuku just had his only real way of fighting shattered to pieces, but luckily he's able to quickly think on his feet. Controlling one of the robots using the same strategy, he realizes that the robot is just as easy to control. He feels like it's a little more clunky. The limbs aren't actually contorted to the point where it's going to run like a human, but it is relatively quick based on how quick he wants it to move, so he's able to smash through other robots using, another robots. He would progressively get the 1-pointer, the 2-pointer, and the 3-pointer. Of course, once he gets the 3-pointer, he holds on to that because it's a little bit stronger, and he begins to smash through robot after robot. He continues to do this and feels that he's picking up speed, and he's actually catching up to a lot of the people around in terms of robot points. This is fantastic. Now he feels like he's definitely going to have a good chance at making it into UA. Before, he kind of had his dream shattered for about 15 seconds when his puppet imploded into nothingness, but it seems like it should work out just fine. He continues to smash through robots, and eventually it would look as if the robots were dwindling heavily. He unfortunately would be forced to rip apart his robot at the last second because he felt like, there's nothing else around, he might as well take the points for the robot that he's currently controlling. He does just that, and he begins to basically look for any other robot to control or destroy. When he continues out and he continues walking around, he doesn't see many around. Unluckily enough, it seems that most of them were destroyed, but just as he thinks this and he begins to feel the ground quaking beneath him. The ground is shaking for a reason. The 0 Point robot has arrived, and the 0 Point robot is walking towards everyone, and everyone begins to flee, in obviously being completely terrified of a giant robot. They don't want to fight that thing. But as Izuku is leaving, he sees somebody. A girl that is trapped under rubble, a girl that is stuck. Izuku goes sprinting over there and begins to basically reach out his hands. He begins to reach out toward the 0 Point robot to get it to stop in its place. And when he reaches out both of his hands, he's eventually able to get it to at least slow down. The 0 Point robot now struggling to walk forward. Izuku is struggling to hold this giant behemoth of a robot in place. He continues to hold it, but his hands begin to shake and his fingers begin to bend. It's as if it's breaking his hand. He continues to hold it and asks if the girl can get out on her own. She says that she must have a broken ankle or something, and she can't get out from under the rubble. It's too heavy. Izuku then decides on something that he's not 100% sure is going to work, but he's going to give it a shot anyways. He then holds the 0 Point robot with one hand. Obviously, the robot begins to move slightly quicker, and his hand begins to shred as if it's breaking in two. He reaches toward the young girl by the name of Ochako Uraka, and he extends the strings out toward her. As he does this, immediately she begins to seemingly stand up and push the rubble off. It seems as if his puppeteer Quirk allows for, people to get stronger at that. He controls puppets, or controls inanimate objects, and he enforces strength within them. So if he enforces strength within this girl, it should allow her to break out. He does just that, and since she's already completely restricted, it's not like it's too hard to puppeteer someone like her. In terms of the sludge villain, it was so much more difficult because not only his mass, but also the fact that he was completely coherent entirely. But he's able to basically help her push all the rocks off and allow her to eventually get out from underneath the rocks and away from the danger zone. But Izuku's hand is about to give out. His right hand breaks, and he can feel the pain spike throughout his arm, but he immediately switches to his left hand and tries to hold his ground as the girl gets out of harm's way. As he does this, the 0 Point robot begins to walk forward toward him, about to squish him, but he begins to concentrate all of the strings toward that one leg, and as his left hand feels like it's cracking and breaking, he sweeps the leg out from underneath the robot as it goes crashing down on its back. But Izuku collapses to the ground as it feels as if he has two broken arms, and he begins to lay there just not being able to move, exhausted and barely breathing, frankly gasping for air. He then passes out, and eventually he would get the medical care he needs, but when he wakes up, he sees Recovery Girl. Recovery Girl tells him that, he's kind of lucky. These breaks on his hands, luckily they ended up being pretty clean breaks. He's going to be groggy because, she used her quirk on him, but he'll be okay overall, and they should heal up relatively soon. She says that was one hell of a display of a quirk. She hasn't seen something like that in a while, and it's definitely impressive. And she hopes that he gets his opportunity to get into UA. Izuku is psyched to hear this, but he's half asleep, and she allows him to leave as long as his mother comes and picks him up, and in which Inko Midoriya does just that. Izuku has a lot of waiting to do, waiting for that letter to arrive. He's in home, resting, of course. After that display of his quirk, he is hurting bad, but luckily he is recovering, and he'll be basically good to go in a matter of a couple days. Eventually, an envelope would come with his name, or addressed to his name. He would open it up, and what would come out of it is something that would make anybody smile. It's a recorder, but not just any recorder. It seems to be a hologram with All Might himself, congratulating Izuku on a job well done. It's impressive. And on top of that, he not only not only passed and got into class 1A, he was the number 1 student, all because of what he did and how he used his quirk to save that girl. Of course, Izuku begins to cry and begins to be extremely happy. But when he starts celebrating a little bit, he can feel his ribs slightly cracking and he sits back down. His body's still feeling the effect of the overusage of his quirk, so he still needs to take it easy for the next couple of days until he goes to UA. But happiness rushes through Izuku's body, and his mother is excited for him as well. This is an opportunity that he never, in his wildest dreams, would realize he could get. And now he's getting it. Izuku Midoriya has his chance at UA and has his chance to get to where he wants to be. And he wants to be the best hero ever. And that is exactly what UA is going to allow him to accomplish, or at least attempt to accomplish. Izuku Midoriya has been accepted into UA, the high school that he has so desperately wanted to get into the entirety of, well, middle school. He's only wanted to get into UA. But UA is obviously one of the hardest and most difficult schools to actually get into. So it's definitely an accomplishment in that regard. Izuku would prepare for his first day. Like I said before, he was a bit under the weather, you could say. More like hurt and injured and healing up, but he should be fine now that he's kind of fully recovered. And he's finally ready for the first day of UA High School. When he arrives at Class 1A. A giant door is waiting for him, and he immediately thinks that there must be some crazy, huge behemoths that are in this classroom. Well, that is to be true, but there are some normal-sized people as well. He walks in and immediately sees Tenya Ida and Katsuki Bakugo arguing, just yelling at each other, and this is kind of a normal occasion for Bakugo. He's that type of guy. He just yells at people for really no reason, and Tenya kind of yells at people for, teacher's pet reasons. But with that said, Izuku just minds his own business and goes and sits down. But Bakugo does see him, getting up and immediately telling him off, saying that he doesn't deserve to be here and that his quirk is still so useless that he won't be able to do anything as a hero. Izuku doesn't listen much to Bakugo nowadays, especially after how much he's been training and basically after saving him. I mean, there's really no reason for Izuku to think otherwise, that he can't overcome basically his quirk not being the best or his quirk not being completely optimal. Eventually, more and more students would continue to walk into the classroom, and Izuku would actually see the girl that he saved at the entrance exam. She would thank him a million times over, but Izuku says that, I mean, that's kind of the job of a hero, right? I mean, they're all trying to be one. She didn't really think of it this way, but still thanks him nonetheless. Eventually, Aizawa or Shota Aizawa would walk into the classroom, and he would immediately turn down the tone of happy to completely somber by straight up telling everyone to shut up, sit down, because this is not conversation time. He tells them all that they're going to be tested because, well, frankly, he does whatever he wants in the classroom and he does whatever he wants in terms of his students. So he tells all of them to get ready, get on their PE uniforms, and get ready for a quirk assessment test. When they all do just that, Aizawa tells the number 1 student, or at least in the entrance exam, to step up and throw this baseball. And immediately, well, Izuku walks up. And Bakugo is furious. He was wondering who got number 1. He didn't think it could have been Izuku. How is this possible? He's such a weakling. His quirk was so useless not too long ago. But Izuku would walk up, grab the ball, not think about anything else other than that. He would channel all of his connection with that said ball. Yes, he made the tennis ball or the baseball into a puppet in a way. But it's more like a connection. A connection with this ball allows him to throw it and extend the connection and push the ball even further. Does this mean it goes 1,000 meters? No, definitely not. But it definitely goes far further than if he just normally threw it. Maybe sitting around 70 to maybe 100 meters. being that he is a pretty strong guy in the first place, and on top of the quirk, he's able to push it a little further. You got to realize this isn't necessarily the best part of his quirk. In terms of raw strength, his quirk isn't exactly that. And he's not going to press his hand into complete obliteration to push this baseball to space, which he probably could make it go really far if he pushed his arm and his hand to extreme limits, very similar to what he did trying to hold a giant robot still. But there's really no reason to do that. He knows his limitations, and he knows that he doesn't want to destroy his body over that. Aizawa would bring this up, thinking that he's holding back, but Izuku explains that there's repercussions to him pushing that hard, and they all have seen it at the entrance exam, what he did and what happened after the fact. Aizawa smirks and nods his head, thinking that the kid definitely has the brain part of it, or the intelligence part of all this, under wraps. He then steps back and goes back to the line as everyone else begins to follow suit. But everyone begins to basically be all smiley and happy about the testing environment. Aizawa gets very frustrated about this and tells them all that whoever gets last place will be expelled. And as they do this, or as he says this, everyone becomes shocked and takes it far more serious. All of the testing goes relatively normal. I mean, Izuku is in pretty good shape. He did train with All Might, so he's in pretty good shape, and overall he's definitely at a higher peak than a normal teenage boy. And also certain regards like the grip strength and stuff like that, he's able to use his quirk to manipulate it and get really high scores. In terms of the speed aspect of things, it's a little bit harder. If he had his puppets, which he currently does not have, if he did, he could probably hop on top of the puppet's back and move at way quicker speeds. But unfortunately, that's not the case. So the number one student, technically in the entrance exam, actually, doesn't do insanely well. He actually places about middle of the pack, with Bakugo and Todoroki being at the very top. This is something that Bakugo would begin to hold over Izuku's head, but Izuku even says that this test isn't necessarily practical. There's a reason why the practical exam to get into the UA entrance exam is called the practical exam. This test right here is just a show of raw strength, in which Aizawa agrees, saying that is definitely the case, but still there are consequences, and he looks down the list to see who's in the last place, being that of Hagakure. The invisible girl got the very last place, and she is to be expelled. But they'll soon find out that's not necessarily the case. But nonetheless, Aizawa begins to explain how and why this is important, but also not that important. It's exactly what Izuku said. There's really no reason to scale strength in this regard, because this is not how a hero truly scales strength. But he wanted to see the limitations and who had certain quirks, and it's more of a teacher analysis, you could call it. Everybody would be sent off to their other classes and other orientations and stuff like that, and eventually the next day would finally arrive. Hagakure, on the other hand, would be enrolled right back into the classroom. Aizawa would quickly explain that it's actually better this way, given the opportunity to basically test the limitations and see where their mind is at as well. Yes, quirks are important, but the mind is important as well, and especially keeping your head on straight when you do find adversity. Obviously, this would make a lot of sense, and frankly, the class would think that this is actually a good idea overall. But with that said, Aizawa begins to explain to all of them that he won't be teaching them today. They'll be doing heroes versus villain training, in which is going to be with him. And just as he says this, the door would swing open at insane speeds, and a loud "I am here" would be sent throughout the room. It's All Might, the number one hero, the one and only All Might, in which everyone is excited to see, including Izuku, especially because, I mean, that's his mentor / teacher at the moment, or for the last 10 months, so they did make some sort of a bond. And Aizawa tells them to listen to All Might and don't do anything entirely stupid. All Might tells them all to get on their hero outfits, in which they all head out to do just that. When Izuku goes and grabs his hero outfit, he also is gifted something interesting. It's a new puppet or a new doll-like figure, and it's far, far stronger. Some girl by the name of Mei Hatsume decided to actually take the scraps of what happened to the last one and implement basically stronger material and different aspects. She obviously wants some credit when he becomes a top hero, in which she writes in a small note, but still it's her job to make workable products, and that last product was definitely really bad, in which Izuku feels a little offended by, but still, it's okay. He decides to take the gift that he's been given, and he begins to tap on it, feeling that it's super strong, way stronger than he's really ever considered making his dolls or making his puppets. And he begins to move or use it to move, and it feels light. It feels as if it can move without even him moving his hands, without even him thinking. It feels that there's no strain on him. It's odd, but it must be some sort of the metal. Maybe it makes it feel like feathers, like air, like he's just moving throughout the air. He's not sure, but he's happy that he got a new basically thing to work with, and he would arrive eventually at awaiting All Might for the entire class. All Might would begin to explain some things. Explain what's going to happen, heroes versus villains, and the training that's going to occur. And he explains that there's going to be two teams here. They're going to have Bakugo and Tenya Ida going up first as the villains, and also Izuku and Ochaku Uraka as the heroes. Now this is perfect, and Izuku is happy that he's going to get this chance to basically team up and see what he can do on a team. But immediately Tenya begins to question if Izuku should be allowed to use his doll. But it's made pretty apparently clear and abundantly clear that he should be allowed to. This is part of his quirk and something that he would utilize in a hero situation, so it's definitely something he will be using. Tenya hears what he's saying, or what All Might is saying, and heads up to the building. Izuku and Ochaku Uraka begin to plan, but the plan is relatively simple. It's really just isolate and, dominate. Eventually, Izuku knows that Bakugo will come charging down. There is no doubt about it. The way he acts, the way he approaches things, Izuku can avoid both of them taking any damage by eliminating Bakugo, or at least knocking him out, capturing him, whatever, as soon as possible when he overextends away from Tenya. In which this is exactly what happens. Bakugo comes flying down the staircase and is met with, Izuku's doll right in his face, immediately landing a punch straight to his jaw and slamming him into the wall. Bakugo recovers relatively quickly, blasting the puppet, thinking that he would be able to absolutely obliterate it. But that's not the case. The puppet is unscathed and not hurt at all, and Izuku begins to apply pressure using his puppet and also himself. Bakugo believes that he obviously needs to take out Izuku. The puppet is being controlled by him, but every weakness that Izuku has is just made up for by the puppet. He tries to blast Izuku, but the puppet is able to protect him, block the damage, and retaliate with some powerful strikes of his own. This continues on, and eventually Bakugo is completely captured as Izuku lets go of his own puppet to basically stun Bakugo with his own quirk. Izuku uses his quirk to basically make Bakugo stand still for a couple seconds and force him to basically be captured. He's captured entirely, and Izuku begins to run upstairs using his puppet for protection on the off chance that Tenya is waiting with a sneak attack. Both him and Ochaku Uraka arrive at the room that the bomb is currently being held, and they see that it's just empty. There's nothing in the room. Tenya did this to actually reduce the effectiveness of Uraka's quirk, but it doesn't necessarily matter because, Izuku just immediately grabs the bomb himself, stringing it over, flying it over toward them, and it lands right in front of them as he touches the bomb, and, there it is. They win. Just like that, All Might comes on the intercom and tells them that the hero team has won. An effective way to use Izuku's quirk is definitely as a bit of a bodyguard, and that's kind of what he did, especially with a more, utilized and also more protective version of his doll. It's definitely something that can be effectively used on almost every playing field. With that said, though, the heroes versus villain training is now wrapped up and over. Obviously, after everyone else has had their turn and so on and so forth. They all are available to head home or able to head home, and when they arrive the next day, it's actually more and more development in terms of what they want to be as heroes. Aizawa explains to them that they'll be doing some rescue training. They've done, pure power, they've done a heroes versus villains, and now they'll be working on rescuing people. Now this is a big part of being a hero. Rescue training is something that is taken very seriously, so he tells all of them to take it as such. Make sure that they're on their best behavior, and to head out to the bus and get ready to head off to the USJ, in which they all do. While on the bus and traveling over, they begin to all speak about who they think has the best quirk. The conclusion and overall consensus would eventually come down to Shoto Todoroki. Here's the problem with Izuku. He might have, the most potential. Maybe he's even shown that he's far better using his quirk than anyone else can use their own quirk. But his own quirk itself took literal years for him to use it properly, and it still has its drawbacks. And frankly, it's extremely difficult to master, and which Izuku hasn't even mastered quite yet. So they believe that, maybe his quirk is the best in terms of, potential, but the effort that's put into it would not match the output that it would eventually get. In which, Izuku finds that to be fair. It's pretty obvious that his life would have been a lot easier if he had a more simple and more powerful quirk, but still, he believes in his own training, and he believes that he can get to the point that he can be someone like the #1 hero. With the conversation ending, Aizawa tells them to all head off the bus, that they have finally arrived. They have arrived at the USJ, and they're greeted by Pro Hero 13. Pro Hero 13 begins to explain many things about what the USJ is, what they will be doing, and various different rescue centers that they'll be going through. There's some that are in the water, on burning buildings, on giant mountains, on snowy mountains, and on so on and so forth. She explains that there are different scenarios, many scenarios. All these scenarios matter in the feat of trying to save people. That depending on the scenario, it all depends on the approach that you can use, especially with certain quirks. Those who have more destructive quirks might have a harder time rescuing people, but it also depends on the mobility and also the freedom that quirk gives them. And there's more explanations that are to come, but as Pro Hero 13 continues to say these things, Aizawa is directed toward the middle of the USJ by Kirishima. Kirishima begins to ask about fake villains and if they have any, but that's not the case. These are real villains. This is a villain invasion. The villains have come, and their whole goal is to end the life of All Might. But All Might is currently not here. Not being at the USJ, and unbeknownst to the people or all the students, they have no idea why he's not there. Even Izuku has no clue why All Might did not show up. Aizawa tells Pro Hero 13 to protect the children as he jumps in like basically a badass to fight all of these villains that are standing in front of them. He begins to whoop on all of the lower tier villains, but it would eventually lead to Kurogiri splitting everyone up. This leads to Izuku falling in a giant lake. Luckily, Asui, or Suyu, would be able to pick him out of the water and save him from getting, utterly eaten alive by these weird water creatures. And on top of that, his puppet did come with him, luckily enough, because he kind of had it really near him when the warp portals happened. So he currently does have his puppet, which is something that's definitely going to be beneficial. They do talk about an escape plan, but Izuku says that he could just send his puppet down there. It doesn't seem like there's enough of those monstrous creatures or enough of those villains to actually take it out. And during this process, Suyu can grab them and jump across the water. And if they don't make it, the puppet should be able to bodyguard them on the way out. So that's the plan they have in mind, in which Izuku does bring up the fact that Mineta could use his sticky balls and they can kite him, or kite all of the villains toward the center. And once they do that, they should be able to get stuck and at least stall it for enough time for them to get out. In which they do just that perfectly. Izuku jumps off and Suyu grabs him and Mineta as they begin to enact their plan. The puppet that he's currently controlling does most of the work, and especially with the high durability that it currently has, it's kind of perfect. It's perfect that that none of the villains can really bite through it and can't really destroy it by any means. And they're able to escape out of the water pretty easily with capturing the villains and making them stay stuck in the water as well. With them getting out of this lake or this pond of a water source, Suyu, Mineta, and Izuku are beginning to make their way back to the original spot that they were originally in. But unfortunately, some things would obviously appear. Izuku would see that Aizawa was in trouble, so he decides to send Suyu and Mineta off and to help out Aizawa the best he possibly can. A giant monster, a creature that is of ungodly proportions, begins to charge at Aizawa. In the nick of time, Izuku is able to put his puppet right in front of Aizawa, thinking he could block the hit. But as this creature punches his puppet, the puppet implodes, shattering entirely. A puppet that basically took explosions from Bakugo, someone that is extremely powerful in his own right. A puppet that could take damage and seemingly deal it out is destroyed in one singular hit. Izuku immediately thinks to himself that he just got another puppet destroyed and that that's not the most convenient thing in the world. But he heads over to try and help Aizawa nonetheless, and as this giant Nomu creature begins to try and punch Aizawa in the face, it's frozen in place. Izuku begins to hold out both of his hands, holding the monster still, as Shigaraki continues to scream at the monster, telling him to hurry up and, well, kill the brat. To kill Izuku and then kill Aizawa. But as these words are being said, it's seemingly getting harder for Izuku to hold the Nomu still. But as he connects more and more with these strings around the Nomu, he feels something. It's odd. There's someone beneath the skin of the Nomu. There's someone within the Nomu. It's seemingly a person. This person isn't dead though. It's in a weird state of comatose, as if the person is in a coma and this Nomu is currently using the powers of this person. Izuku can feel it, but also can feel the soul of this person. The person beneath the Nomu seemingly not wanting to hurt anyone, not wanting to hurt, kill, or do anything wrong. And Izuku can feel that. For some reason, the feeling of this, the soul within his body, actually helps Izuku. Normally, what he was seeing, and when he would try to puppeteer people, it was the resistance that truly made it impossible. But his puppeteer Quirk makes them far stronger when in full control. But this person, he wants Izuku to be in full control. His quaking hands would begin to slow down, Izuku would stop hurting, and it seems as if his hands were steady as a surgeon. Surgical maneuvers were about to be put into place. Izuku, in full control, puts down his left hand, and Shigaraki, the man that is behind all of this, begins to scream, beginning to say, tell the Nomu to do its job. Kill the brat, kill Aizawa, hurry up, what are you doing? But nothing in response. The Nomu is entirely still. Entirely, in fact, to the point that it's creepy. It's creepy that the Nomu's just staring at Aizawa and Izuku. Aizawa asks what's going on. What's happening? And are they, or did he somehow connect with the Nomu? Izuku gives a little thumbs up at his waist, and well, let's just say the Nomu begins to make the ground rumble by turning back around towards Shigaraki. Izuku then forces the Nomu, or in a way forces the Nomu, to charge forward at Shigaraki. This changes everything. The tide of the battle shifts in a matter of seconds, and the Nomu slaps Shigaraki across the USJ. Kurogiri tries to help Shigaraki the best he possibly can, but even Kurogiri can do very little. The Nomu is able to actually get to the weak spot of Kurogiri, slamming him to the ground and punching his metal armor so hard that it sends shockwaves around the area, knocking Kurogiri unconscious, laying there not moving an inch. Kurogiri, though, is struggling to reawaken. Of course, he's hurt extremely bad, but while everything else is going on around him, his mental, or at least in his mind, he's trying to break free. Izuku can actually weirdly tell that Kurogiri is very similar to this Nomu, but before he can really do anything about it, a portal would awaken or open up. As an awakened Kurogiri would save Shigaraki in a matter of seconds, but unfortunately Kurogiri would be practically out of commission and would pass out directly after that incident. As All Might would finally arrive, everything seemed to have calmed down substantially. The villains were subdued, Shigaraki was gone, Kurogiri was in captivity, or at least was unconscious at this moment, and the Nomu was completely under control by Izuku. But questions began to resume, and they began to ask, or when everyone else and the heroes arrived, they asked Izuku a ton of questions about what the Nomu exactly is. He would explain to his best of his ability, and he would also explain that Kurogiri is very similar, that they should get these two right here locked up as soon as possible, and he might be able to learn some more information about what's going on. As he connects with these beings, it seems that there is a connection that has grown between both of them. Izuku can sense and feel that these people are actual people and they're in a way dormant. But with regular people that have conscious minds and are moving on their own, it's a lot different. He can't control them nowhere near as easily. All Might begins to tell Izuku that he's definitely proud of him and that he's definitely come a long way from the boy that he's seen before. He's definitely becoming a hero that should be proud of himself and proud of the actions that he's taking. Izuku now has a job, something that he didn't even expect to go through. Yes, the USJ was saved. Yes, the people and the children and the kids are now safe, luckily enough, but there's a new hurdle to now jump over. These two people, the Nomu and Kurogiri, seem to be different, but at the same time very similar. Kurogiri seems to be a perfected Nomu, as if it's a Nomu that can kind of react on its own, but has its own agenda based on what the creator of that said Nomu gave it to them. But it's odd. After a long, or basically a couple days, a good long period of time, Izuku doesn't exactly understand what Kurogiri is. He can sense that there's someone within, someone completely different, in which that leads to a lot more questioning, a questioning of how this person looks. Descriptions begin to unfold, and Izuku continues to explain what he sees, but a lot of this time that he's working with the heroes, a lot of it is being restricted, and he's not able to actually participate in a lot of things that are happening at the school. And there are a ton of things that are going to happen. Aizawa is going to have to leave Izuku to it, especially with his responsibilities as a teacher and his responsibilities at hosting or being part of the UA Sports Festival. Izuku is bummed out that he can't really help, but this is an important thing. Well, or he's bummed that he can't participate, but this is an important thing that he needs to basically do. The more they research, the more they look into it, they realize that Kurogiri is someone that is very, very, very close to UA. Someone that Izuku may not know personally, but it is a student of former UA that died while trying to save people, and he sacrificed himself to save a ton of people. A quirk so similar to Kurogiri's, how could they not match this up sooner than they just did? Now this is bad. Something and someone that is this close to UA, how did they do this? How did this even occur? That's something they're not sure of. But this news is going to eventually get to Aizawa. And when it does, well, let's just say Aizawa's connection with this person that is dormant within this so-called Kurogiri, well, it's a connection of best friends. Izuku Midoriya has run into something far, far more complicated than he could possibly imagine. And far more complicated than UA could possibly imagine. Something that if it got out to the public, UA's reputation would be questioned, in fact. But what will happen when Aizawa finds out who this person is behind Kurogiri, all because of Izuku's ability to basically puppeteer the answers out? What will be the next steps for the heroes to basically use this as their advantage? Well, you'll have to find out in the next part of What If Deku Had a Puppeteer Quirk. From the very beginning, Izuku realized something. That he could feel this connection between him and his quote-unquote puppets. But it's far different when you have someone that has some sort of a consciousness. It's far different when you can feel what they feel. Izuku quickly would use this to his advantage, and that would be with the one and only Kurogiri. Kurogiri is sort of like a Nomu, but a Nomu that has a dormant person within, someone that is still there, but is sitting there idle, not able to move, not even an inch. Izuku realizes this, and knows this for a matter of fact, and then continues to try and poke and pry into, well, this person's mind. After a long period of time, days in fact, he would finally get within his mind, get within this person's brain, and he begins to speak with him. He learns of this guy's name, named to be Oboro. He's not sure who this is, not 100% entirely, but he does quickly learn that there is a connection with UA and there is a connection with Aizawa. Soon, Izuku would continue this process, poking, prying, and eventually he would be able to rip Oboro out of quote-unquote Kurogiri, separating them entirely. This then leaves a metal body that is nothing. A metal body that collapses to the ground, and the existence of Kurogiri itself no longer is there. Oboro is Kurogiri, and Kurogiri was Oboro. In a way, him stripping Oboro out changes everything, changes that Nomu that was created. Izuku collapses to the ground after ripping a human being out of its own consciousness, and he begins to pant. He's completely shocked to see that this person was truly in there, and everybody around him is in complete awe. Izuku may not know who this is, but everyone else does. It's as if they've seen a ghost that has finally come back from the dead. And everyone is shocked, but soon Aizawa would finally come. Seeing Oboro once again, he begins to have feelings and emotions that he's never had in his life, begins to cry, and begins to basically freak out in a way. But luckily, Oboro is still conscious, and luckily now all it really takes is for some, well, reminding. And once Izuku and Aizawa are able to get through to Oboro, now there's information that nobody else would even know, but Oboro does. Now this is something that they needed, and this is something that they really truly wanted to have an advantage, a big advantage on, well, the villains. Of course, Izuku would be still going to school during this time, but a mass majority of his time would be spent trying to separate Oboro and help them out. Eventually, that would occur, like I said, but he would miss out on some crucial moments and some crucial things. When he would get back, he wouldn't have an internship to go to. Unluckily enough, he just wasn't able to participate, so he was put in a situation where he isn't able to, well, do anything too major. But as a thank you from basically Aizawa himself, Aizawa takes on a student in him, takes on Izuku as his own student to train him to his best possibility. On top of that, basically teaching him martial arts and basically learning how to fight single targets on his own. Sometimes he won't have a puppet. Sometimes he won't be able to basically do anything if there is nothing around. So being able to protect himself basically by himself is something that Izuku needs to more or less do. During this time, Izuku would continue training and learning, but after a couple of days would pass, well, let's just say something tragic would occur. The hero killer, for one, would be captured, but at the sacrifice of the one and only Tenya Ida. Tenya Ida, a student and classmate of Izuku, classmate of Class 1A, would be taken down and killed, well, by the hero killer, unfortunately. The death of Tenya Ida would get back to Izuku relatively quickly, but he would remember. Maybe he could somehow bring him back, maybe he could. It's just not possible. Izuku wanted to be optimistic, but there's no way. With Oboro, it was different. It was someone that existed, someone that was there dormant. With Ida, he's just gone. He could use Ida as a puppet, but I mean, how moral is that? I mean, how could he even think about doing something like that? And it wouldn't be bringing him back to life. It would basically be using someone that has no soul anymore within him. Izuku is pretty disappointed by this, and Aizawa does comfort him mildly, telling him that this is the line of work that they chose, and that these are the consequences of being a hero. With that said, everyone else and all of Class 1A would arrive back into the class. The mood is somber, but they are told that they have things to do and they need to use this as motivation. Quickly, they're told about the exams, final exams in fact, what they need to do and what needs to be done. Izuku begins his studying process and many others do as well, eventually getting done with the written portion of the exam. After the written portion is done though, the practical then arrives. Izuku feels that this practical has to be something different than just robots, and he would be correct. Eventually they would arrive at their giant gym, and they would be told that the practical will be against teachers. Everyone would be told who they are going against, but then it's Izuku's turn. But there's one person left, Bakugo. But who's the teacher? There's nobody else that's here. Just as they say this, All Might comes crashing down, standing in front of all of them, saying that he is here and that he will be the opponent of Izuku and Bakugo. Now this is a fight that Izuku was interested in, was not necessarily worried about, but wanted to see where he was at in terms of fighting capabilities. On top of that, a new puppet is made for him, something even stronger than the last one, and Izuku is able to utilize, or hopefully would be able to utilize, this puppet against All Might. Planning would begin, but more like lack of planning would begin when Bakugo would refuse to hear anything Izuku has to say and refuses to hear him out. So the plan is kind of just run in and hope for the best. When the gates swing open, Bakugo goes charging out. Izuku follows close behind, trying to keep up the best he possibly can, but he basically watches as Bakugo charges in extremely recklessly. And, well, it doesn't go well off the rip. All Might immediately sends a shockwave of wind toward them, sending them off flying. Izuku recovers relatively quickly and goes right back at All Might as Bakugo charges forward. Bakugo tries to blast All Might right in the face, but just as Bakugo is about to do so, Izuku immediately uses his quirk to basically stun All Might slightly as he gets as an explosion basically lands clean to All Might's face. As this basically explosion would land on All Might's face, All Might would be shocked. It's as if he was completely stuck in place and he couldn't really guard to it. Yeah, All Might does just stand there and take hits, but when he's basically put off guard, it definitely does a far bit more damage. Izuku continues to do this throughout the fight and tries to help Bakugo fight All Might, but after a while, it's pretty obvious that physically Bakugo will not be able to keep up. Izuku helps out with his puppet as well, and he's happy to see that the puppet can take a punch from All Might and doesn't get it completely obliterated. Izuku continues the fight with Bakugo, actually intertwining all three of their attacks at the same time: his puppet, Bakugo's attack, and his own attacks. He continues to fight All Might, but it seems like they're basically playing this losing battle. It seems that everything is seemingly going downhill to the point that it doesn't really feel like they've really got a chance, which in a way is pretty true. Bakugo sits there and refuses to run and refuses to go away, and it's pretty obvious that during this practical exam they should just try and escape. So Izuku decides that he's going to make the decision for both of them. He gets frustrated with Bakugo not wanting to take the, well, quote-unquote easy way out, or the more tactical way out, in fact. So he gets frustrated and he stuns All Might immediately with his quirk and holds him in place. As he does this, he sends his puppet after All Might to grapple with him and grab him and get him stuck basically in place entirely. He immediately uses his quirk on Bakugo and slings Bakugo toward the exit, as Izuku begins to hold All Might still, and he basically holds him there as long as possible. Bakugo refuses to go and refuses to basically escape and get help, so Izuku immediately forces him to go back as he takes a punch straight to the jaw from All Might, getting flung backwards as he's pretty damn hurt. The puppet wasn't able to take the blow this time around, and unfortunately he took a good punch, which leaves him heavily staggered. But Bakugo sees this happening and bites his pride, or basically, hunkers down on his pride and escapes through the doorway of some sorts. Izuku looks over as he gets up, and his puppet immediately protects him from All Might. He grabs onto the side of his puppet as they take off away from All Might. Over and over again, Izuku would slightly use his quirk to stun All Might from basically keeping up, but Izuku is getting extremely fatigued, tired, and he's already extremely hurt. So eventually, both of them would be able to escape. They do technically pass, and both of them technically pass, but Aizawa talks about how they really need to get their own ideas under wraps. Making plans, especially in this world, is important, extremely important. He tells them though that they're lucky that they passed and that they're going to the forest training camp anyways, but they need to realize these things before things get worse. Izuku agrees as he stumbles his way to Recovery Girl, but he sees the face of Bakugo, and it seems like Bakugo does not care one bit. Bakugo doesn't want to listen, doesn't want to, well, you could say, help out, and he wants to do his own thing. He doesn't need help from a weakling like Izuku. He's just frustrated and pissed off, and Izuku just doesn't say anything else. The next day, everyone heads off to the forest training camp, and they would arrive to a bit of a cliff's edge. They would actually meet the Wild Wild Pussycats, and Izuku being Izuku, I mean, he's still a pretty big fanboy of all heroes, so he's basically tells them that he's a big fan, so on and so forth. But eventually it would lead to them seeing the Class 1B bus skating on right by. Now what does this mean? Oh, it means they're all getting pushed off this mountain and basically are getting a good luck. They all get sent off the mountain, and they have to fight through a horde of these monster-like creatures that are made from, well, the ground. It seems like one of the Wild Wild Pussycat's quirks actually makes these so-called monsters. Luckily, Izuku and everyone else is well prepared for all of this, so they were able to push through all these monsters relatively easily and relatively quickly. But they still get there pretty late compared to when they were supposed to be there. But when they arrive, they're told that they're allowed to get cleaned off, eat some food, get some rest, so on and so forth. Of course, after that is said and done, the next day would be when real training begins. The real training that would involve them just trying to execute their quirks even better. Izuku listens to Aizawa as he tells everybody what they need to do and what they need to basically get out of this training, in which Izuku learns that him personally, he just needs to be able to have a connection with multiple things at once, and he needs to work on that. So Aizawa actually brought some other puppets, some that aren't super strong or anything like that, but it will allow him to make these connections stronger and with more things. Izuku thinks this is a great idea, and if he holds this for long periods of time, it should build up a bit of a powerful regard for himself. So he does just that. He begins to basically use his quirk on multiple things at once and tries to focus as hard as possible. In doing this, it allows him to build his stamina and allows him to build his strength especially with his quirk. About a week would pass throughout this time, and actually no villains would show up, especially obviously because of the lack of Kurogiri. No villains would show up at all, and they would just go off home after this long period of training pretty safe. It seems like when they all hop on the bus, they all have made substantial strides to getting far stronger, in which everyone is extremely excited about, and Aizawa won't show it, but he is excited about it as well. His students are growing at a rapid pace, and this is always good for a teacher to see. With that said though, when they hop on the bus and head back, they begin to see some things that are going on. They begin to listen to the radio about some sort of villain attack in a nearby city in Japan, but it's odd. What's going on? It doesn't feel like some normal villain attack. No, there's no way. It's more than that, right? And as they arrive in the scene, everything is desolate and everything is changed, and they see All Might himself on the TV fighting All For One. Izuku sees this and believes that they need to help him. Yeah, they should get to safety, but they need to help All Might. Why aren't the other heroes helping him? In which, obviously, Aizawa makes it pretty clear that it seems that they don't really stand a chance against All For One. It's all up to All Might. Izuku shakes his head and thinks this is ridiculous. What if they take advantage of that? What if they decide to take out All Might with more help? Well, what if people start teaming up on All Might? This is a big idea that Izuku is worried about, and that would come to fruition when multiple villains begin to intrude on the battle with All For One. These villains, or the League of Villains, would begin to intrude on this battle and turn the tide for All For One, to the point that there seems to be no chance at all. Nomus would begin to arrive to help All For One, as well as the League of Villains would be courted out to basically safety, because All For One knows that they need to be alive to guarantee basically their win or success. Izuku sees this and immediately would head off, would leave, in which Aizawa tries to stop him, but there is no stopping Izuku at this point. He takes his puppet and begins to move extremely fast, faster than most people can actually move on their own. Aizawa, in a way, is proud of Izuku, especially with how far he's come to this point and how strong he's obviously become. When Izuku arrives, he sees the Nomus trying to basically back All Might into a corner, and All Might is basically down to his last legs. But the one main issue that they didn't realize is that Izuku not only got stronger, but he can now control multiple things at once. All For One believed that he was able to change the fact that Izuku would be able to more or less control these Nomu, but that's not the case. He did not do enough. All For One underestimated Izuku. Now this is an issue. He underestimated Izuku to the point that, well, let's just say he's able to control all the Nomus that are currently trying to fight All Might. He turns them against All For One, basically attacking All For One all at once. All Might, using his last bit of strength, uses everything he has to try and be rid of All For One. All For One kills all of the Nomus in one foul swoop, using a mechanism that he knew he would need it built in just in case. But that's not the only thing that ends, or that's not the only thing that changes relatively quickly. All For One sees that Izuku is on the battlefield and that he is the catalyst for what's going on. He is the catalyst for the reason why things are getting swayed in that direction. So immediately All For One sends tendrils towards Izuku, and not being quick enough and already being tired out from controlling 5 to 6 Nomus, Izuku looks on as the tendrils go flying at him, about to kill him. All For One is about to kill Izuku. But no, out of nowhere, Izuku looks up to see All Might in front of him, taking the tendrils through his chest, but stopping them as they shatter. All For One just killed All Might. All Might lays there on the ground bleeding, and Izuku tries to help him. But All Might looks at Izuku and looks back at All For One, basically telling him that this is a fight that he needs to stay awake for. He needs to be aware that this is no time to grieve. And just as he looks over toward All For One, well, the light from All Might's eyes fade, and the last whispers of One For All go as well. Izuku, though, he's mad, frustrated. He looks up at All For One as All For One is laughing, smirking. He thinks this is entertainment now, that he believes he's won. But no, Izuku stands up, and immediately All Might stands up as well. Izuku morally feels that this isn't right, but he knows that All Might would want him to do whatever is necessary to win, whatever is necessary to take down this monster. All Might stands up with holes in his chest, and as he does, they begin to heal, but All Might is still dead. But it seems that the spark in his eyes are in a way still there. Immediately, though, Izuku watches as a puppeteered All Might strikes down All For One and eventually taking him down. Izuku sits down on the ground as he looks at All Might's basically forsaken body, gone. All Might is dead. The number one hero has been vanquished, has been taken down, but All For One is down as well. Izuku takes the body of All Might out of there as everyone else arrives to basically take away All For One to bring him to Tartarus. Izuku brings the body back to UA to show everybody what happened, and tells them that many believe that All Might is still alive on the regard that Izuku was using him as a puppet, but All Might needs to go away, be cremated, and be put away for a long time. Let him rest easy, and Izuku doesn't want to ever do that again, especially to someone that has passed in front of him. Izuku is sad, mad at the same time as sad, and he doesn't know what to do. Aizawa tells him to never do something reckless like that again, but he says that he's proud of him. Something that a hero needs to make are choices that are extremely difficult, and that was an extremely difficult choice. He had to go against his own morals of using a dead body or someone that has passed, as a puppet. He realized he needed to do it to really need to do this to win, and that's what happened. He might have saved so many because of it. Izuku doesn't feel like he should be happy with himself, but he listens to Aizawa, hears him out. But that's about it. Izuku is in a state of somberness, is sad, and frankly, who wouldn't be? But nonetheless, Izuku has shown what he could do as a hero. He's shown what he has in store and what he's capable of. And frankly, there's going to be more to come, because there are things that Izuku has to look forward to in his future as a hero, even though his mentor, his role model, and the former #1 hero has passed away. All Might be gone, but the will of All Might lives through Izuku, and he knows this, and he's going to continue that legacy, continue to protect, and continue to help wherever he can. This is exactly after the battle with All For One. The #1 hero, unfortunately, has died, but it seems that there are heroes in its wake soon to be following in the path of All Might. It sucks when you watch someone like All Might fall, when you watch someone like the #1 hero pass away and pass in front of your face. Everyone else doesn't know about All Might's death. The only people that really know are the people of UA and most pro heroes. Other than that, civilians have no idea. Villains, or most of them, have no idea. All Might was a symbol of peace, someone that needed to stay alive for people to feel protected. But at this moment, All Might is no longer there. So what would they feel if his death is broadcasted worldwide? Well, hopefully that doesn't come to fruition. Hopefully they can still feel protected, at least for now. Izuku and Class 1A would continue about what they needed to do. They would move into dorms for the safety of the students, and especially without the #1 hero, the protection would definitely be needed. On top of that, well, let's just say they have a lot planned for the future. This next week is something that they really need to push themselves through, which definitely includes making some super powerful and super awesome special moves. But Izuku is still kind of out of it at this moment. He doesn't know how to feel. All Might did die right in front of him, and that was his mentor. It must have hurt extremely bad to see him pass in such a way. So Izuku would continue train these special moves that he comes up with. Some of the special moves involves a protection with using his puppet on his own body, something that would allow him to basically be durable as the puppet. But unfortunately, this isn't as usable because the puppet isn't really manufactured to be like a bodysuit or a piece of armor, and he still has trouble using the puppet when he's actually the puppet, which is ironic. But to be fair, that doesn't necessarily matter. He then actually continues this training to make sure he can feel pretty equipped in the future. With that said though, they actually have something that they need to personally go do, and something that they're gonna need to be prepared for, especially so they can be doing some hero work, and that is the Provisional Hero License exam. This exam basically will allow them to act as pro heroes, at least under supervision to a certain extent. On top of that, they can actually enroll into work studies and work with some of the top pro heroes. Izuku thinks this is a great opportunity, and he believes that they should be able to get through this test relatively easily. In a way, he would be correct. When they would arrive, everyone is extremely friendly with Class 1A, like extremely friendly. It's kind of odd, but Bakugo makes it abundantly clear that for one, they're not going to be friends with anybody, and on top of that, they're just scoping out the competition. That is all they want to do. They want to find some sort of weakness and some sort of out. Izuku realizes this as well. He begins to think that Bakugo, maybe he is a little bit more cool-headed than he possibly thought in the first place, but still, he begins to think about some things that basically other schools would know and that they wouldn't, and that's how their quirks work. Izuku begins to tell them this. They're all going to be a target, he can just tell. They all know exactly how their quirks work, they know the weaknesses, and they know how to isolate them. But there's two big problems with that. Izuku, for one, was not in the UA Sports Festival, and two, they've all gotten a far bit stronger since the UA Sports Festival. So when they all head out, they put on their suits to basically have a little bit of a dodgeball in a way fight, in which the way it works is they have 3 red lights, and if all 3 red lights go off, that they're eliminated. They personally have to eliminate 2 other people to pass. Izuku would wait for it to basically begin, and he would use his puppet as a way of getting these things relatively easily and relatively quickly at that. When the alarms would blare, he knows that Class 1A would be targeted, which is perfect for him because he hid his puppet in an undisclosed place so that he can get the lights turned off of 2 people in a matter of seconds. When they all come to eliminate Class 1A and Izuku Midoriya, well, let's just say Izuku gets his 2 people out in a matter of seconds. Easily, Izuku is able to surprise them with his puppet, in which they were not ready for at all. They had no clue what Izuku could do, even though they've sort of seen him online, but I mean, you can't really deduce what he's going to do without a long period of time. That easily allows him to get his 2 eliminations, passing Izuku along to the next round in a matter of seconds. Everyone is shocked, especially the 2 people that are eliminated, not knowing exactly how Izuku's quirk worked definitely threw them for a loop. Izuku would head to the waiting room as he awaits on the rest of Class 1A to pass, in which they do. The rest of Class 1A hands down passes. They do their best, and basically within a week's worth of basically being at the Forest Training Camp would definitely help in exceeding amounts. Remember, in canon, they weren't there the entire time. They were there for a short amount of time. So the fact that they were there the entire length and were able to train the entire length definitely allowed them to be a far bit stronger than they would be in canon. Izuku, on the other hand, would wait for his class to join him. And once they did, he would then wait upon the next, test. And that test would be kind of perfect for Izuku himself, and that's more of this rescue portion of the test. It allows him to save people and help people out to an extent. When that part of the test would begin, it would be easy for Izuku to help everyone set up and also help everyone rescue people that are in particular situations. He would get pretty good scores because of this. He would use his puppet to save as many people as possible and basically protect. He would use his puppet to hold up heavy structures if need be, and so on and so forth. His puppet and himself is perfect for saving these people. After saving a decent amount of people, he heads back to help Momo get everything set up for a health situation, or at least a healthcare like center. While he's doing this though, he actually hears rumblings and then sirens begin to blast like crazy, and that is known as a villain attack. The PA would announce this villain attack, and it's Gang Orca and a bunch of cronies. Gang Orca basically cries out, yelling, and tells the heroes that they better figure out what they need to do next. The first 2 people to head the front is Inasa and Todoroki. Todoroki and Inasa try to blast toward Gang Orca, but unfortunately their paths would begin to clash. They would begin to not be able to hit Gang Orca at all, and someone else that actually tried to fight Gang Orca first is almost caught in the crossfire. But luckily Izuku's puppet stands in front of that said person, saving him, allowing him to actually get out scotch-free and not completely obliterated. Izuku yells at them, telling them to focus up and not do anything so stupid next time. He tells them both that they really need to adapt their plan properly, in which they hear him out, and they're able to make this so-called wind vortex with flames around Gang Orca, slowly but surely drying him out. But Izuku could tell that Gang Orca must have a plan. One plan will never stop a pro hero like him. He sends his puppet into the vortex as well, in which his puppet is resistant to most things, including fire. in which when he enters, he can see that Gang Orca is about to grab water and pour it on himself, but Izuku punches him in the stomach using his puppet. Gang Orca commends him, especially for this idea. He knows that his puppet is pretty durable, so this is a pretty good idea for basically to basically stop Gang Orca, but he says that it's not good enough. Gang Orca grabs the puppet as the puppet begins to hit him over the head, injuring him pretty badly, but using the puppet and his fire resistance, he's able to get out, at least not scotch-free. He's able to escape the vortex, but he's extremely injured, and on top of that, he's dehydrated, since the water that he was going to drink was knocked out. Well, now they have a weakened Gang Orca, Inasa and Todoroki, who aren't really in that bad of a situation, and Izuku, whose puppet is still alive and well and is breaking free from Gang Orca's grasp. This fight is metrically over. Izuku has turned the tide in a matter of seconds, especially with his Puppeteer Quirk. On top of that, when Gang Orca tries to fight back with his cronies, he's stunned every so often by Izuku's Puppeteer Quirk. He's stunned over and over again to allow people to have openings and allow many to basically take instances to fight off Gang Orca without getting injured. During this time, it really takes a matter of seconds for Gang Orca to fall. And when he does, the PA system announces once again that it's actually over. This test is over and the provisional hero licensing exam is wrapped up. Everyone begins to kind of cheer that it's over and wonder if they all passed. They all head outside and begin waiting. They all get their scores, and it seems that Izuku and many others in Class 1A pass the exam. The only people that actually don't are Katsuki Bakugo and Shoto Todoroki. Well, that's in Class 1A. Inasa also doesn't pass. But still, there are some, incidents that happen throughout this exam that were pretty interesting. There was a girl there that was, relatively pretty in comparison, and basically all of Class 1A were kind of confused about her. What is up with her? It seems that she was kind of stalking the area and just looking around, making sure certain events were going about, as if she didn't want to intrude in any of them, as if there was something to lose, as if she was watching all of them. But that's something they need to shake off for now. Maybe it's some sort of scare tactic. Maybe it's some sort of scouting tactic that other schools do. He's not sure. None of them are sure. But with that said, most of them have their provisional hero license, and now it's time to enter work studies. Work studies are a hard thing, especially because they need to get a lot done for the school and the work study at the same time. On top of that, they need to get the proper work study that they are looking for. Luckily though, Izuku gets an offer he can't refuse, and that's from one of the big three. But of course, before that, the big three does explain what work studies are, how they properly approach them, and so on and so forth, leading to a fight with Mirio Togata, other known as Lemillion. Lemillion whoops on everybody, destroys the entirety of Class 1A. Izuku does find some common ground with Mirio, you could say, landing some blows and also keeping up with him. But at the same time, Izuku doesn't have the experience like Mirio does. Eventually finding an opening, Mirio is able to take out Izuku, at least for the time being. Mirio tells Izuku though that he definitely is talented. He's able to basically concise the whole game plan into a very small amount of time. Izuku knows how to analyze a battlefield relatively quickly, and that's something to be commended for. Izuku thanks him, of course, but he still wants to beat Mirio, not just, get a compliment from him. Of course, that is good enough for now though. Izuku hears him out and eventually is told that Sir Night-Eye wants Izuku to head over to his agency. He's gonna get tested a little bit. Mirio's going to bring him in, and then Sir Night-Eye will show him the ropes, or to an extent. When Izuku does head over to the Sir Night-Eye's agency, or Night-Eye's agency, he does find that Night-Eye wants to ask him a ton of questions. one about All Might and many others included. Night Eye does bring up the fact that he wanted All Might to retire far sooner, and that actually the person that he fought, other known as Lemillion or Mirio, well, he's the one that is the successor of All Might's power. Izuku is shocked to hear this and thinks that that makes sense. I mean, he wasn't really able to keep up with Mirio once he started ramping up. He was able to take over the battlefield in a matter of seconds with pure speed and power. Well, literally, as he's screaming power. But that necessarily doesn't matter now. But still, they begin to conversate about a couple things. And obviously, Izuku goes through a couple things as well. Reasons why he should be a sidekick with Night Eye, and so on and so forth. Because there are major things at stake. Those things that are currently at stake are involving this gang, the Shiha Hazaikai. The Shiha Hazaikai is ran by a man by the name of Overhaul. Overhaul is someone that needs to be taken down, put in prison, and dealt with as soon as possible. Because if not, there could be serious consequences to not doing so. So, Izuku joins in on this little escapade of trying to find Overhaul, and Mirio and him would begin their, well, patrols. The crazy part is, it's as if everyone that is bad flocks to Izuku, because on their first patrol, a young girl begins running out of an alleyway, running into Izuku, and he grabs her and asks her if she's okay. She's shaking, terrified, bandages all over her body, and as they look up, a man walks out from the alleyway with an odd mask on, and this right here is the known villain, gang leader of the Shiha Hazaikai, Overhaul. Overhaul stands in front of them, and Mirio is in complete shock. He doesn't show it, but he tries to bring down the situation to make sure everything is just fine, to make sure that nothing goes wrong. But Izuku begins to feel powerless in a way. Mirio wants to let this guy go. Let this guy go with this young girl? No. Izuku won't let that happen. He doesn't want to let that happen. Izuku immediately sends his puppet toward Overhaul, but in a matter of seconds, the puppet is obliterated, disintegrated, and gone. Overhaul shakes his head and basically tells them that it's now time for them to die. Izuku reaches out his hand, and Overhaul does the same. Before Overhaul can touch Izuku, though, he's stopped in place. Overhaul is stuck right in front of Izuku, not able to move. He then tells Mirio to grab the girl and go now, to get back and send reinforcements as soon as possible. Izuku can feel his hand slowly but surely breaking, that he needs to hold on. He needs to hold this man in place. It doesn't matter how much willpower, it doesn't matter how much strength Overhaul has, he won't let go. He will not let Overhaul hurt anybody else, and including that little girl. Will Izuku be able to hold off Overhaul long enough for reinforcements to arrive? Will Izuku be able to win without his puppet being disintegrated by Overhaul in a matter of seconds? This matchup doesn't look very favorable in Izuku's side, but maybe, just maybe, he can pull it out of the fire. Well, you'll have to find out in the next part of What If Deku Had a Puppeteer Quirk. Izuku Midoriya stands in front of Overhaul. He's holding him still with all the might he possibly can conjure up, holding him there so that he can't make a move. He's holding Overhaul, but the struggle is within his arms, fingers, and his entire body. This spur-of-the-moment decision for Izuku is something that he'll come to regret, because when his fingers begin to break, Overhaul pushes forward, sending floor spikes his way. Izuku is forced to dodge, and he tries to keep up as best as he possibly can. He begins to use even cars to try and ward Overhaul off, but Overhaul is on a mission now. He wants to get Eri back. That's the only thing that matters, the only thing that he cares about now. Reinforcements will soon come, so Izuku hopes that his reinforcements come before then. He continues to fight off Overhaul using his quirk, but with no puppet and nothing else. No puppet to help, no anybody else to help. This is something that he'll have to do alone. So he decides to pull something out of his pocket. Pulls something out that he didn't realize he'd be using. He avoids Overhaul enough and he begins to wrap it around his neck. It's a white scarf of some sorts and it begins to kind of float. Izuku smirks and in his own mind he thanks Aizawa, at least giving him a chance to, well, keep up with this monster. Izuku begins to fight Overhaul, using the scarf to basically avoid any touch entirely, landing blow after blow and using his Puppeteer quirk to stun Overhaul. In doing this, he's hopefully giving himself enough time to stall, allowing him to basically ward off Overhaul until Mirio gets back. And after some time would eventually pass, a punch to Overhaul right in the gut, one that Izuku couldn't even see, would then appear. A punch to the face, and then Overhaul would get thrown at a wall. Izuku would look in shock to see that it's Mirio. He's back. Mirio has officially come back, and he tells Izuku that he'll take it from here. Izuku can feel something within Mirio, as if the power is surging even further than he can possibly imagine. Mirio is exerting some sort of energy he's never seen before. Mirio begins to press Overhaul, press him to the point that Overhaul feels that his body is breaking, destroying itself from the inside out. Izuku watches as the other heroes finally arrive, but the villains that are here to help Overhaul arrive as well, breaking out into a large fight inside the entire area. Overhaul uses this as an advantage. Overhaul immediately basically reassembles one of the giant monster of men that he has, becoming this monstrous like creature, and he begins to fight Mirio. This gives Mirio a bit of struggle, but unfortunately, with Izuku still up and Izuku still alive, well, he can of course help Mirio out, stunning Overhaul here and there, allowing Mirio to land blows to his face, stomach, and eventually hit him so hard that he slams into the ground and he breaks off into everything and everyone he absorbed. Izuku sits down absolutely exhausted, but he sits there for a second really contemplating, believing that at least they won, but he did nothing. He really didn't do anything. I mean, yeah, he sort of helped, but he started this at the end of the day. They could have decided to wait on it. They could have planned something further, but he jumped the gun and more or less got this put into a scenario, this scenario specifically. And yeah, it came out to be all right, but what if it wasn't going to be all right? He wasn't going to be strong enough to handle Overhaul on his own. Mirio had to do that. Mirio. Izuku begins to immediately feel odd, as if he feels useless to a certain extent. But Mirio would come over to him, and he can tell by the look on his face that he's not happy with the outcome for some reason. And Mirio tells him that he did just as much as everyone else here today, and that to not think otherwise. Izuku was put into a scenario where he wasn't really in the best position possible, and it's going to be like that sometimes. And it's better that he figured that out now than figure that out a far bit later. Izuku takes this to heart, and right after they basically clean up all the rest of the villains, he immediately starts training once again, overviewing exactly what Aizawa told him, taught him, and showed him all that time ago, or a couple weeks prior to this. And he begins to work. He begins to train. He begins to get ready. He gets a new puppet, of course, but Mei Hatsume isn't too happy about it, especially after the fact that they keep he keeps breaking even stronger puppets, or finds ways to break even stronger puppets that she makes. But she says that she made this one technically stronger, and try not to break it this time, because it takes a lot of money and investment from UA for it to actually, well, be made. Izuku hears her out and says that he'll try his best not to get it broken once again. But he continues. He continues to train, work, and he wants to basically feel better about his lack of being able to do anything in that scenario. And to an extent, this was a blessing for Izuku, a blessing for everybody. Izuku felt that he was falling behind. He wasn't, though. He was comparing himself to a future top 10 hero, the future of Hero Society. Mirio Togata not only is the future of the Hero Society, but he was the successor of All Might. He has one for all, and what that means for him in the future, well, that's uncertain. It could mean death, it could mean prosperity, it could mean being the number one hero. But Mirio, with a smile no matter what, would sacrifice his life and put his life on the line to save even one person. So in a way, it's a blessing that he got this power. Izuku would continue his training, and eventually it would be time for, well, a bit of a test for him. It would be Class 1A versus Class 1B. This is some sort of a training session, and they even add Hitoshi Shinso, who is basically someone that had a pretty skilled Quirk, but wasn't able to get into UA on hero or as a hero student because of, well, the requirements that were originally set forth. But other than that, Izuku knows that this will be a great test for him. But he knows that he needs to show everyone here that he personally is far beyond what they currently are at this moment. When the fight begins, it's as if he's in a class of his own. He knows what to do, he knows what he has to do, and he goes about it as quick as possible. And maybe he does find some more or less struggle with Monoma, especially with Monoma using his Quirk, but at the same time, his Quirk is so difficult to perfect that it's as if he didn't have a Quirk at all. His Puppeteer Quirk took years to master, and he still hasn't necessarily mastered it entirely. But let's just say the closer he gets to mastering it, the wider the gap is between him and the rest of Class 1A. Even after watching Bakugo absolutely obliterate Class 1A, or Class 1B, excuse me, he still feels that he'll be ahead of Bakugo, and that he can still be an amazing hero as long as he keeps up his training and basically continues to learn more and more about his Quirk. But there's a test coming. A test far greater than anything that they can possibly imagine. Something that is truly terrifying in the feats of everything that surrounds them. Endeavor is getting news from a top hero, the number 2 hero, other known as Hawks, learning of a war that is coming, learning that a war is quickly approaching, but it was stalled because of, well, certain events, and the lack of Kurogiri and the lack of their warp portal is something that they need to compensate for. On top of that, the heroes realize something, that this might be their advantage. They have Oboro. They have someone that can turn the tide if the villains aren't careful. And, well, let's just say that tide would be turned in a matter of seconds if they do something rash. Izuku is the ticket. Izuku is the reason why this war could collapse at the villain's feet. But that's a story for another day, and a story that may not be told. But if you enjoyed this series, make sure to leave a like, make sure to leave a sub, make sure to leave a comment down below, all that good stuff. And for those wondering if I'm going to the war arc, sometimes I do, just because of certain scenarios that I see. But normally when I go throughout a one-for-one storyline of My Hero Academia, I don't go into the war arc until it's done with the anime, because I know some people have seen the war arc and some people haven't because they read the manga, whatever. But yeah, once this season is over for My Hero Academia, we will be going to the war arc no matter what. So that's just something I wanted to bring up. With that said, though, I hope y'all enjoyed, and I hope y'all continue to enjoy, and I hope all y'all have an amazing day. Later.